There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that wear the simple, unassuming clothes of a Tuesday night or a rainy afternoon. They do not announce themselves with thunder or trumpets. They slip in through a door left carelessly ajar, a quiet question asked in the dark, a shift in weight on a shared sofa. You only recognize their true nature in retrospect, when you trace the intricate map of your life backward and find that single, unassuming point from which all the subsequent rivers of your experience began to flow in a new and irreversible direction. For me, that moment smelled of old books and the lavender detergent I used, and it felt like the impossible, terrifying warmth of Alex's hand finding mine in the space between the sofa cushions, a silent question asked and answered in the span of a single, shared breath. It was the beginning of the end of the world I had known, and the quiet, unceremonious start of the only one that ever truly mattered. It was a universe built on a foundation of careful boundaries, a friendship so deeply rooted that I had spent years tending to it like a rare and fragile garden, terrified that a single misplaced step, a single greedy touch, would trample it into ruin. Alex was, and had always been, a source of brilliant, uncomplicated light in my life. We had met in the clamor and chaos of our first year of university, two disparate energies drawn together in the awkward orbit of a mandatory orientation seminar. He was all bright, easy smiles and a laugh that seemed to fill whatever room he was in, a software engineering major who spoke in the clear, confident language of logic and code. I was the quiet one, the photography student who lived more comfortably behind a lens, translating the world into frames and compositions, more adept at capturing emotion than expressing it. He saw the world as a series of problems to be solved, systems to be optimized. I saw it as a series of moments to be felt, light to be captured before it faded. Our friendship should not have worked, according to the simple calculus of personality types. Yet it did. It worked because beneath his sunlit exterior, Alex possessed a stillness I had not expected, a capacity for quiet companionship that perfectly matched my own. He never pushed me to speak when I was lost in thought, never mocked my tendency to stare at the way afternoon light fell across a brick wall for minutes on end. In turn, I think I provided a kind of anchor for his restless energy, a quiet harbor where the relentless churn of his mind could find a moment of peace. We became a fixture in each other's lives, an accepted constant. Our apartments, separated by a 10-minute walk, became extensions of each other's own spaces. My fridge was often stocked with the specific brand of orange juice he liked. His bookshelf held a few of my favorite photography collections, their spines slightly worn from his occasional, curious perusal. The ache of my feelings for him was a secret I kept locked in the most fortified room of my heart. It began as a slow, creeping warmth, a subtle shift in the tectonic plates of my affection that I barely noticed until the landscape had been irrevocably altered. It was in the way my breath would catch when he would run a hand through his perpetually messy dark hair in frustration over a line of code. It was in the ridiculous, soaring joy I felt when he would flash me a grin across a crowded room, a silent acknowledgement that said, "You and me, we're a team." I learned to live with it, to manage it. I became an expert architect of my own interior world, constructing walls and buffers around that central, glowing feeling. I told myself that the friendship was the masterpiece, the thing worth preserving at all costs. My love for him was a dangerous, volatile element that had to be contained, lest it shatter the beautiful, stable structure we had built. I became a master of platonic affection, calibrating every hug, every casual touch, to fall within the acceptable, safe parameters of friendship. I learned to smile when he talked about the women he was dating, a polite and supportive mask hiding the quiet, grinding erosion happening within me. For 5 years, this delicate balance held. He had his life, his relationships, his career that was taking off with a dazzling velocity. I had my photography, my quiet routines, and my secret, which I guarded with the fierce, lonely diligence of a lighthouse keeper. His longest relationship was with a woman named Sarah, a smart, sharp-witted graphic designer who, for a time, I genuinely thought might be the one for him. I learned to accommodate her presence in our dynamic, to make room for a third person in our comfortable orbit of two. I photographed their second anniversary party, my lens a merciful filter between my heart and the reality of his happiness with someone else. I focused on the technical details, the aperture, the shutter speed, the composition, anything to distract from the raw, unfiltered truth of the image I was capturing. Alex, looking at her with a kind of adoration I had only ever dreamed of receiving myself. When they broke up, it was sudden and messy, a clean, brutal severing that left him adrift in a way I had never seen before. The brilliant light that always seemed to emanate from him dimmed to a low, flickering ember. He was unmoored, his logical world thrown into emotional chaos, and for the first time, he turned to me not just for companionship, but for sanctuary. That was the shift. It began subtly, as most cataclysmic changes do. It started with a phone call late on a Wednesday night, a time when he would normally have been with Sarah. His voice on the other end was hollowed out, a mere echo of its usual confident timbre. "Hey, you busy?" I was in my darkroom, the faint, acidic smell of fixer clinging to the air, watching an image of a solitary tree slowly bloom into existence on a sheet of photographic paper. "Never for you," I said, my own voice softer than I intended. "What's wrong?" There was a long, ragged sigh, the sound of a man trying to hold himself together with fraying threads. "It's over. Me and Sarah. It's really over this time." My heart performed a complex, contradictory motion, a pang of sympathy for his pain, sharp and genuine, warring with a shameful, treacherous flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. I crushed it instantly, burying it under the weight of my concern for him. I was his friend first. That was the rule. "I'm so sorry, Alex. Do you want to talk about it?" "No," he said, his voice cracking on the single syllable. I don't want to be alone right now. Can I come over?" It was a question he had never needed to ask before. The door to my apartment had always been an open one for him, a silent, standing invitation. The fact that he asked for permission now spoke volumes about his shattered state. It was as if the basic assumptions of his world had been so thoroughly shaken that he was no longer sure of his footing anywhere, not even with me. He was checking the stability of the ground before taking a step. "My door's unlocked," I told him. "Come over." He arrived 20 minutes later, looking like a ship that had been battered by a storm. His clothes were rumpled. His eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with an exhaustion that went far beyond mere lack of sleep. He did not speak when he entered. He simply walked to my old, comfortable sofa, the one with the slight dip in the middle cushion, and collapsed into it. I made him a cup of tea, the way my mother used to for me when I was sick or sad, and sat in the armchair opposite him. We existed in that silence for what felt like an hour. I did not push him to talk. I let the quiet be a space for him to simply exist without expectation. I watched the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the warm mug, the way his gaze remained fixed on a single, uninteresting point on my hardwood floor. He was rebuilding his world from the inside out, and I understood that my role was not to offer blueprints or advice, but simply to provide a safe, quiet construction site. That night was the beginning of the ritual. He started spending most of his evenings at my apartment. He claimed his own place felt too empty, haunted by the ghost of a shared life. My small, cluttered space, filled with stacks of books, camera equipment, and the scent of developing chemicals, became his refuge. At first, he would leave late, sometime after midnight, a quiet and grateful "Thanks, Leo," mumbled at the door before he disappeared into the night. But as the weeks wore on, exhaustion began to win the battle against his resolve. One night, while we were watching some mindless action movie we had both seen a dozen times, I glanced over and saw that he had fallen asleep, his head lolled back against the cushions, his mouth slightly open. His face, in the flickering blue light of the television, looked younger, stripped of the tension and pain that had become his constant companions. It was a face so open and vulnerable that it felt like a violation to look at it for too long. I did not have the heart to wake him. It was the first real piece I had seen on his features in a month. I gently took the remote from his slackened grip, turned off the television, and draped a soft woolen blanket over him. I retreated to my bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar, listening to the sound of his soft, even breathing in the other room. It was a strange and powerful kind of music, a rhythm that settled something deep within my own chest. The next morning, he was apologetic, embarrassed. "God, Leo, I'm so sorry. I completely crashed." "Don't be," I said, handing him a mug of coffee. "You needed the sleep. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it made me feel unsteady. "You're a good friend," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump forming in my throat. Because in that moment, the word friend felt like both a comfort and a cage. The ritual evolved. Sleeping on the sofa became a regular occurrence, an unspoken arrangement. He would arrive after work, drained and silent, and we would fall into our comfortable pattern of a simple dinner, a quiet movie, and the eventual, inevitable drift into sleep on his part. I became a student of his slumber, learning the subtle cues that signaled his descent. The slight slackening of his jaw, the way his breathing would deepen and even out, the slow, gradual surrender of his body to the pull of gravity and exhaustion. Each time, I would cover him with the blanket, turn off the lights, and retreat to my own room, leaving the door ajar. That sliver of light, that open passage between our sleeping spaces, became a symbol of our new dynamic, close but separate, intimate yet undefined. It was a state of agonizing, beautiful suspension. I lived for those evenings, and I dreaded them in equal measure. Every night was a tightrope walk over a chasm of my own feelings. Having him so close, so vulnerable, was a kind of exquisite torture. My apartment, which had always been my sanctuary, was now charged with a new and potent energy. His presence lingered even when he was gone. The faint scent of his cologne on the sofa cushions, the indentation his body left on the blanket, the extra toothbrush he now kept in my bathroom. These were the small, mundane artifacts of a life that was becoming increasingly intertwined with my own, and each one was a tiny, sharp pinprick to the carefully constructed balloon of my self-control. I found myself watching him with an intensity that bordered on painful. I was a photographer. After all, observation was my native language. I studied the cartography of his face, the way new lines of stress had etched themselves around his eyes, the way a muscle in his jaw would jump when he was lost in a painful memory. I saw the deep, unspoken loneliness in him, a loneliness that mirrored my own, and the desire to reach out, to soothe it, to simply place my hand on his and say I know, was a physical, palpable force I had to fight against every single second. The boundary we had always maintained, the clear line between friendship and something more, began to blur, its edges softened by shared silence and proximity. It was a process of slow, almost imperceptible erosion. One particularly cold night, weeks into this new routine, he shivered in his sleep on the couch. He looked small and uncomfortable, his long frame awkwardly folded into the confines of the sofa. My bed, a simple queen-sized frame in the next room, suddenly felt obscenely large and empty. An idea, wild and reckless, took root in my mind. It was a practical solution to an obvious problem. It was also, I knew, a dangerous door to open. I stood over him for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could just add another blanket. That would be the safe, sensible thing to do. That would be the choice that kept the existing architecture of our friendship intact. But his shiver was so pronounced, his sleeping face so creased with discomfort, that the practical part of my brain, the part that simply wanted him to be warm and comfortable, won out over the part that was terrified of the implications. I touched his shoulder gently. "Alex," he stirred, his eyes fluttering open, clouded with sleep. "Leo? What's up?" My throat was dry. "You look cold," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And you're going to wreck your back on this thing. Just come use the bed." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, confusion, maybe hesitation, before it was washed away by a wave of bone-deep weariness. He did not argue. He did not question it. He just nodded, a slow, sleepy movement. "Okay," he mumbled. That was it. Just okay. He pushed himself off the sofa and followed me into the bedroom like a sleepwalker. The room felt different with him in it, smaller and more charged. I pulled back the covers on the far side of the bed, the side by the wall. He crawled in without a word, pulling the duvet up to his chin and turning to face the wall, his back a clear, demarcating line down the center of the mattress. I hesitated for a moment, then walked around to the other side and slid under the covers myself. The space between us felt both as wide as an ocean and as thin as a sheet of paper. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every tiny sound, every subtle movement. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the small gap. I could hear the soft whisper of his breathing, deeper and closer than it had ever been before. This became the new ritual. The pretense of the sofa was abandoned. He would come over. We would exist in our quiet companionship, and when the exhaustion claimed him, we would wordlessly retreat to the bedroom. We developed an unspoken choreography. He always took the side by the wall. I always took the side by the door. We always maintained a careful, deliberate space between us, a neutral territory of cotton sheets and unspoken rules. We never spoke of it in the morning. We would wake up, I would make coffee, and we would talk about work or the news or some stupid video we saw online, as if the profound, terrifying intimacy of the preceding 8 hours had never occurred. It was a shared secret we kept even from each other, a fragile bubble of denial that allowed this strange, new domesticity to continue. For me, those nights were a study in suspended animation. I would lie awake for hours, listening to him breathe, my entire being focused on the man lying a foot away from me. It was a form of self-inflicted torture to be so close to the one thing I wanted more than anything in the world and be unable to reach for it. My body ached with the effort of remaining still, of not rolling over, of not closing that small, significant gap between us. I would imagine what it would feel like to lay my hand on the curve of his back, to feel the warmth of his skin through his t-shirt, to thread my fingers through his hair. These thoughts were dangerous currents, and I fought to keep from being swept away by them, clinging to the fragile raft of our friendship. I told myself this was what he needed from me, a safe harbor, a platonic warmth, a body in the bed to ward off the ghosts of his loneliness. To ask for more, to introduce the messy, complicated variable of my own desire, would be a selfish betrayal of his trust. And so, I lay in the dark, night after night, a silent guardian of a peace I had helped to create, and a lonely prisoner of my own heart. The space between us and that bed began to shrink. It was not a conscious decision on either of our parts, but a slow, gravitational pull. An inch one night, another the next, until the neutral territory had all but vanished. It began with accidental brushes in the night, a foot touching a foot, a hand grazing a back. Each time it happened, my entire nervous system would light up, a jolt of pure electricity. I would freeze, waiting for him to pull away, to re-establish the boundary. But he never did. If anything, he seemed to settle into the contact, a soft, sleepy sigh escaping his lips. He was the unknowing initiator, a sleepwalker dismantling the careful architecture of my defenses without ever being aware of it. He was the one who, in the deep hours of the night, would shift and turn, his body unconsciously seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking mine. One night, I woke to find his arm draped over my waist, his face buried in the space between my shoulder blades. His breathing was a warm, steady puff against my neck. I lay perfectly still, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. This was the line. He had crossed it in his sleep, and now I had a choice. I could gently move his arm, re-establish the safe distance, pretend it never happened. Or I could stay. I could accept this unconscious offering, this accidental intimacy, and allow myself, just for a few hours, to have the one thing I had so desperately craved. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The fall would be terrifying, but the possibility of flight, however brief, was intoxicating. I chose to stay. I closed my eyes and focused on the feeling of his weight against me, the solid, reassuring presence of him. It was the most profound sense of peace I had ever known, a feeling of rightness that resonated in my very bones. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. I fell back asleep like that, held by him, and when I woke again in the pale, pre-dawn light, he was still there. But he was awake. I could feel it in the subtle tension of his body, the way his breathing was no longer the deep, even rhythm of sleep. His eyes were open, I was sure of it, staring at the back of my head. The silence in the room was absolute, a fragile, crystalline thing that I was afraid to shatter with a single word or movement. This was a new territory, one for which our unspoken rules had not prepared us. He was conscious of his position, of his arm around me, of his body pressed against mine. And he was not moving away. The seconds stretched into an eternity. My mind raced. trying to decipher the meaning of his stillness. Was he embarrassed? Was he trying to figure out how to untangle himself without waking me? Or was it something else? Was he, like me, simply waiting? Finally, after a lifetime contained in a handful of heartbeats, his voice, a low, rough whisper, broke the silence. Leo. The sound of my name on his lips was devastatingly intimate. I did not move. I could not. I'm awake, I whispered back, my own voice hoarse. Another long pause. I could feel the frantic thumping of his heart against my back, a rhythm that matched the frantic tempo of my own. His hand, which had been resting passively on my waist, tightened its grip ever so slightly. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it felt like a seismic event. It was an acknowledgement, a confession, a question. Would it be okay, he began, his voice strained, hesitant, each word carefully chosen, as if he were navigating a minefield. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The world stopped. The air in my lungs turned to stone. The question was so impossibly gentle, so filled with a vulnerability I had never heard from him before, that it broke through every wall I had ever built. He was asking for permission. He was giving me an out. He was laying his own fragile, confused heart at my feet and trusting me not to crush it. In that moment, all my fear, all my carefully constructed reasons for why this could never happen, dissolved into nothingness. All that was left was the simple, undeniable truth that had been living inside me for years. I did not answer with words. I simply turned in his arms, a slow, deliberate movement, until I was facing him. His eyes, in the soft gray light of dawn, were wide and searching, filled with a potent mixture of hope and terror. I saw my own reflection in them. And then, I closed the final, infinitesimal distance between us and pressed my lips to his. It was not a kiss of passion or fire. It was a kiss of quiet discovery, of profound relief. It was tentative and soft, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of sleep and sadness and the staggering, terrifying hope of a new beginning. It was the feeling of a long-held breath finally being released. In that single, gentle press of lips, 5 years of unspoken longing, of carefully managed friendship, of secret, solitary ache, found their voice. It was a conversation we had been waiting our whole lives to have, and it was happening now in the sacred silence of my bedroom, in the moments just before the world outside woke up. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested against each other. His eyes were closed, a single tear tracing a path from the corner of his eye into his hairline. The room was still, but for us, everything had changed. The river had finally broken its banks. The morning after was a masterpiece of awkward, suffocating silence. The beautiful, fragile intimacy of the pre-dawn hours had evaporated with the rising sun, leaving behind a thick fog of uncertainty. Alex woke up before I did, and when I emerged from the bedroom, I found him already dressed, standing by the front door with his keys in his hand, his posture rigid and defensive. He would not meet my eyes. He stared at a point just over my shoulder, his jaw tight. The man who had whispered such a vulnerable question to me in the dark was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. "I have to go," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any of the warmth and emotion of the night before. "Early meeting. I have to prep." It was a clumsy, transparent lie. Alex never had meetings before 10. My heart, which had been soaring only a few hours earlier, plummeted into a cold, dark pit of dread. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss had been a mistake, a moment of lonely confusion on his part that he now deeply regretted. I had broken our friendship, the one thing I had sworn to protect, for a fleeting moment of impossible bliss. The shame and fear were so intense they felt like a physical illness. "Alex, wait," I started, but he was already opening the door. "I'll call you later," he said, the words clipped and final. He did not look at me as he slipped out and pulled the door closed behind him, the soft click of the latch sounding as final and deafening as a gunshot in the quiet apartment. He did not call. Not that day, not the next. My calls went to his voicemail. My texts were left unanswered, marked by the two cruel, blue check marks that signified they had been read and ignored. Each hour of his silence was a fresh wave of agony. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, analyzing it from every angle, searching for the moment where I had gone wrong. Had I been too eager? Had I misunderstood the question? My mind, my greatest tool as an observer, became my tormentor, constructing elaborate scenarios of his regret and disgust. The quiet sanctuary of my apartment became a prison. Every object was a reminder of him. The sofa, the blanket, the empty space in my bed, the damn toothbrush still sitting in its holder in my bathroom. His ghost was everywhere, a constant, silent accusation. After 3 days of this radio silence, I could not take it anymore. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I would rather know the worst, to have him tell me to my face that it was a mistake and that he wanted to go back to being just friends, even though I knew that was impossible now, than to exist in this agonizing limbo. I had to know. I needed to see his face, to hear his voice, to get some kind of resolution, no matter how painful. So, I put on my jacket, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the buttons, and walked the 10 minutes to his apartment. Each step was a battle between the desperate need for answers and the paralyzing fear of what those answers might be. The familiar walk had never felt so long, so fraught with peril. It felt like walking toward my own execution. I stood outside his apartment door for a full 5 minutes, my fist raised to knock, unable to complete the simple motion. I was terrified of what I would find on the other side. Rejection? Anger? Pity? Finally, I took a deep, shuddering breath and knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. I heard movement inside, a pause, and then the sound of the locks turning. The door opened a few inches, and he was there, looking even worse than I felt. He was still in the clothes he had worn to work. His hair was a mess, and the shadows under his eyes were darker than ever. He looked haunted. When he saw it was me, his face closed off. A flicker of panic, or maybe guilt, crossed his features before being replaced by a weary, guarded expression. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rasp. He did not open the door any wider. He was a physical barrier, a closed gate. "Can I come in?" I asked, my own voice steadier than I expected. The cold terror had solidified into a kind of numb resolve. I was not leaving until we talked. He hesitated, a war playing out on his face. For a moment, I thought he was going to say no, to close the door and leave me standing in the hallway. But then, with a deep, resigned sigh, he stepped back and pulled the door open, allowing me to enter. His apartment was dark, the blinds drawn against the late afternoon sun. It was unervingly neat, but in a sterile, unlived-in way. It felt like a hotel room, not a home. It felt like a place someone was hiding in, not living in. He did not turn on any lights. He just walked into the center of the living room and stood there, his back to me. "What do you want, Leo?" he asked, his voice directed at the drawn blinds. The coldness of his tone was a physical blow. "I want to know what happened," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. "I want to know why you disappeared. I thought we had a moment. Was I wrong? Did I imagine it?" He let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. It was the sound of pure self-loathing. "A moment," he repeated, still not looking at me. "Yeah, you could call it that, then talk to me, Alex," I pleaded, taking a step closer. "Please, don't just shut me out. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, just say it. I can take it." "The silence is what I can't take." He finally turned to face me, and the raw, undiluted pain in his eyes stole my breath. This was not the face of a man who felt disgust or regret. This was the face of a man who was terrified. "You can't take it?" he shot back, his voice rising, cracking with a desperate energy. "What about me, Leo? What am I supposed to do with this? You think I planned this? You think I wanted to completely detonate my life, to blow up the one good, stable thing I had left?" His words hit me like shrapnel. "Is that what I am to you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A thing? A stable thing?" "No," he said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure, frantic desperation. "That's not what I mean. You're everything. You're my best friend. You're the only person who's been there for me, the only person who makes any sense in this whole goddamn mess." And I took that, and I twisted it into something else. Something I can't. I don't know how to handle. He started pacing the small living room, a caged animal. "I'm a mess, Leo. My life is in pieces. I just got out of a 3-year relationship. I'm lonely, and I'm confused, and I've been leaning on you, using your kindness as a crutch. And then I do that. I kiss you. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to you, to take advantage of your generosity like that." I finally understood. His withdrawal was not about me. It was about him. It was not rejection. It was a misguided, painful attempt at self-flagellation. He thought he was protecting me from his own chaos, from his own perceived selfishness. The anger and hurt I had been feeling began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of profound, aching tenderness. He was so lost. I walked over to him, stopping his frantic pacing by placing my hands gently on his arms. He froze, his body rigid with tension, but he did not pull away. "Alex, look at me," I said, my voice soft but firm. He reluctantly lifted his gaze to meet mine. "Did you think for 1 second that I didn't want you to kiss me? Did you think that was just generosity? That I was just being a good friend?" A look of genuine confusion crossed his face. I don't know. I wasn't thinking. I woke up and you were there, and it felt right. It was the first thing that's felt right in months. But it can't be. It's not. Why not? I pressed. Why can't it be right? Because, he burst out, pulling away from me, his voice thick with anguish. Because I don't deserve it. I don't deserve to feel that good. I don't deserve to have someone like you, who is so fundamentally good and kind, and drag you into my disaster. I don't deserve this. His words were a gut punch, a confession of a pain so deep and a self-worth so shattered that it left me breathless. He collapsed onto his sofa, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. He had reached his breaking point. The carefully constructed dam of his control had finally burst, and all the grief and confusion and loneliness he had been holding back came pouring out. I sat down beside him, the space between us charged with his sorrow. I did not say anything for a long time. I just sat there, a quiet presence, letting him cry, letting him release the poison of his self-recrimination. When his sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, I reached out and put my arm around his shoulders, pulling him gently against my side. He resisted for a second, a final, reflexive attempt to keep his walls up, but then he just collapsed into me, his head finding its now familiar place on my shoulder. He felt so heavy, so defeated. He said it again, his voice a muffled, broken whisper against my shirt. "I don't deserve this." I held him tighter, my hand moving to the back of his neck, my fingers threading into his soft, messy hair. I leaned my own head against his, a silent gesture of solidarity, of shared burden. "You're wrong," I said, my voice low and certain, a clear, unwavering note in the storm of his emotions. I felt him hold on to me, his fingers gripping my shirt as if he were afraid I would disappear. That small, desperate act of holding on gave me the strength to say what needed to be said, the truth I had held inside for so long. "You deserve everything." He went still in my arms. I could feel the moment the words landed, the moment they bypassed his frantic, logical brain and went straight to the wounded, aching core of him. I continued, my voice still a whisper, speaking the truth directly into his ear. "You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be cared for. You deserve to feel safe. And you deserve to be loved, Alex. You deserve to be loved for exactly who you are, mess and all." I paused, taking a breath that felt like it was drawn from the very center of my soul. "And if you'll let me, I'd really like to be the one to do that." He did not say anything. He just held on tighter, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping his body. It was not a sigh of sadness, but of surrender. It was the sound of a man who had been fighting a war alone for too long, finally allowing someone else into the trenches with him. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, the last rays of the setting sun filtering through the edges of the drawn blinds, striping the dark room with faint lines of gold. It was a quiet, fragile truce. In the ruins of his apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of his old life, we began to build the foundation for a new one. It was not a grand or dramatic moment. It was quiet and broken and real. It was everything. The journey back to my apartment was conducted in a profound, delicate silence. We did not speak. There were no more words necessary, not yet. The confession had been made, the truth laid bare, and now we were left in the quiet, uncertain aftermath, navigating the landscape of this new reality we had created. I drove, my hands steady on the wheel, while Alex sat in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights. He looked utterly spent, hollowed out by his emotional catharsis, but there was a new stillness about him, a release of the frantic, panicked energy that had been radiating from him for days. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile, rain-washed calm. When we arrived at my building, he followed me up the stairs without a word, his steps slow and deliberate. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken questions. What now? Where do we go from here? I felt a tremor of the old anxiety return. Had I pushed too hard? Had I said too much? But then he turned to me in the soft light of the entryway, and the look in his eyes was not one of fear or regret, but of a deep, weary gratitude. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His touch was not hesitant or accidental this time. It was intentional. It was a choice. Can we? He started, his voice still rough. Can we just go to bed? It was a simple request, but it held the weight of everything we had just been through. It was not a plea for escape into sleep, but a request for sanctuary. He was not asking to forget, but to heal. I squeezed his hand, a silent affirmation. Yeah, I said softly. Let's go to bed. The choreography was different this time. There was no pretense, no unspoken rules about sides of the bed or maintaining a careful distance. He followed me into the bedroom, and we undressed in a comfortable, quiet synchronicity, folding our clothes and placing them on the chair in the corner. When we slipped under the covers, he did not turn his back to me. He turned toward me, his body in open question. I moved toward him, closing the space between us until our bodies were aligned, a perfect, seamless fit. He sighed, a deep, contented sound, and rested his head on my chest, directly over my heart. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him securely, my chin resting on the top of his head. I could smell the familiar scent of his shampoo, a scent that was now inextricably linked with the feeling of home. He was a solid, warm weight against me, a grounding presence. I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. He was not asleep, not yet. He was simply resting. He was letting himself be held. For a man who had spent his life solving problems and being the strong one, this simple act of surrender was perhaps the bravest thing he had ever done. We lay like that for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of the city outside my window, listening to the beating of our own hearts. Finally, his voice came, a low murmur against my chest. Leo, I'm here, I answered. I'm sorry, he said. For hiding. For being a coward, you don't have to be sorry, I told him, tightening my hold. You were scared. I get it. I've been scared for 5 years. I felt him lift his head slightly, his gaze finding mine in the dim light. 5 years, he asked, a note of wonder in his voice. I nodded. A long time, I admitted. I was just better at hiding it. A small, sad smile touched his lips. All that time, he whispered, more to himself than to me. All that time I was searching for something, for this feeling. And it was right here the whole time. He rested his head back on my chest, nuzzling into the warmth. I'm an idiot, no, I said, pressing a soft kiss to his hair. You just took the scenic route. He was quiet for a moment, and then I felt his hand come up to rest over my heart, his fingers splayed against my chest. It's so calm, he murmured. Your heartbeat. It's always so calm. It's not, actually, I confessed. Not when you're this close. He tilted his head back again, a genuine, gentle smile gracing his features for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds. Good, he said softly, and then he leaned up and kissed me. It was a kiss of quiet certainty, of promises made and accepted. It was a kiss that said, this is real. This is where we begin. The days that followed were a process of gentle, careful discovery. We were learning a new language together, a language of intentional touch and spoken affection. The ambiguity that had plagued us for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, joyful clarity. We learned how to be together in this new way. We learned that his hand fit perfectly in mine as we walked down the street. We learned that I made coffee just the way he liked it, and that he had a talent for making pancakes that were perfectly fluffy every time. We learned that the silence between us was no longer a space of uncertainty, but one of deep, abiding comfort. His apartment remained a place he only visited to pick up clothes. My small, cluttered space became our shared home, our nest. His things began to migrate over, a testament to his intention to stay. A stack of his books appeared on my nightstand. His laptop found a permanent home on a corner of my desk. His favorite hoodie ended up draped over the back of my armchair, a soft, comforting sentinel. My apartment, which had once been a reflection of my solitary life, was now transforming into a reflection of us. It was a slow, organic process of merging two lives, two worlds. There were still moments of fragility, of course. Healing is not a linear process. There were days when I would see a shadow pass over his face, a ghost of the old fear and self-doubt. In those moments, I would not press him for words. I would simply go to him, wrap my arms around him from behind, and hold him until I felt the tension leave his shoulders. And he, in turn, learned to read the subtle currents of my own anxieties. He learned to see the moments when my old habit of self-protection would try to reassert itself, and he would counter it with a simple, disarming gesture, a gentle touch to my cheek, a quiet, "Hey, I'm right here." We were learning to be each other's safe harbor. One Saturday morning, a few weeks into our new beginning, I was in my darkroom, developing a roll of film I had shot the day before. The images were of the simple, domestic moments we had been sharing. Alex at the kitchen table, bathed in morning light, a coffee mug in his hands, his shoes next to mine by the front door, the rumpled, empty space on his side of the bed just after he had gotten up. They were not dramatic or grand photographs. They were quiet and intimate and profoundly personal. They were pictures of my happiness. The door to the darkroom creaked open, and a sliver of light cut through the dim, red-lit space. Alex stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the bright light of the apartment. "Sorry," he whispered. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not," I said, carefully clipping a wet print to a drying line. "Come in." Just close the door all the way, he slipped inside, plunging the room back into its soft, ruby glow. He came to stand beside me, his shoulder brushing against mine. He looked at the images hanging on the line, the small, captured moments of our life together. "You took pictures of me making coffee?" he asked, a hint of amused surprise in his voice. "I take pictures of things I want to remember," I said simply, turning to look at him. In the strange, monochromatic light of the darkroom, his features were softened, all sharp edges smoothed away. He looked beautiful. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze still on the photographs. "I love watching you work," he said. "You're so focused, so present. It's like the rest of the world just falls away." "It does," I admitted. "In here, I can control the light. I can make things clear." He turned his head, his eyes meeting mine. "Is this clear?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Us." I reached out, my hand finding his in the dark. His fingers curled around mine instantly, a familiar, comforting weight. I brought his hand to my lips and pressed a kiss to his knuckles. "It's the clearest thing in my life," I said. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes, lighting them up even in the dim red light. He leaned in and kissed me, a long, slow kiss that was full of the quiet confidence we had built together. It was a kiss that tasted like certainty, like a promise of countless more Saturday mornings to come. It was the feeling of a photograph developing perfectly, an image of a future I had once only been able to dream of, now blooming into beautiful, tangible reality right before my eyes. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, a silence that was no longer empty, but full of unspoken understanding, of shared peace, of a love that had finally, after so long, been given permission to breathe. The door to that secret room in my heart was no longer locked and guarded. It was wide open, and the light, brilliant and uncomplicated, was pouring in.